What's up guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at how to paint this little base. If you're interested in seeing how it was made, check out last week's video, there's a link in the description box below. Alright, let's get to it. Do the fireball thing. I started off by priming the model using zenithal highlighting. To do that I first sprayed it with some Games Workshop Chaos Black, and then I sprayed it from above at about a 60-degree angle with some Tamiya Superfine White. And when I was doing this I only sprayed from one direction, I didn't turn the base while I was spraying the white. That creates this pre-shading effect where the details are dark on one side and bright on the other. We'll be using this to our advantage when we paint it. When you're painting earth, it's important that you use a mix of different colours. Actual dirt is never just one shade of brown, there's usually all sorts of different colours in there. So to emulate that, we're going to have to make a bunch of different earth tones on our palette. Here we have some Vallejo dark brown wash, some scale colour black forest green, some black, chimera red ochre, phthalo blue green shade, magenta, and finally some scale colour wood ink. To mix our colours, first we're going to take some of the red ochre on its own. It has quite a nice reddy brown colour, and we're going to add some water to it, thinning it down to a glaze consistency. Every colour we make here is going to be a glaze. So next we'll take that red ochre again, this time adding some black, darkening it down. So now we have two pretty distinct brown tones, actually four if you count the wash and the ink. We'll also mix a bit of black into the green to get a nice desaturated green colour. And then we'll take some of the blue and the magenta and mix those together to get a nice violet colour. So now we have a few different browns, a nice green and a violet colour, which should be enough to create quite a good earthy look to our base. We'll start off using the Vallejo dark brown wash. I don't want this to go on too thick because we want to bring in our various colours quite gradually, so I'll add a bit of water to the wash to thin it down slightly. That way it won't cover up too much of our detail when we put it on there. Alright, so to start off we're going to use that dark brown wash to paint the whole surface of the texture on the base. If you've watched any of my other basing videos, you'll know that I quite like to use this dark brown wash as a starting point for dirt or earth effects. I just think that it gives you quite a nice place to work from. I quite like the colour and it dries really well. Just be sure to get the sides when you're doing this, you don't want them to stay pure black or miss any of the little white bits on the side. Once it dries, it's going to look something like this, so you can see that it gives quite a nice subtle effect. Alright, so now we'll use some of that darker red ochre and apply it in little patches here and there on the surface, just to create some variation. Now before the glaze dries, I'll use a second brush just to pull the edge of the glaze away to the sides, simply by putting the brush tip into the edge of the glaze and drawing the bristles away to the sides. That just feathers the glaze out a bit. Doing that helps to keep everything looking natural. You don't want any abrupt edges to your colours, you want them all to sort of flow into each other. Again, we'll do that in a few spots, being fairly random in where we place them. We'll take some of that green colour now and do essentially the same thing, just placing the green onto the surface, then using a second brush to draw out the edges of the glaze so that it doesn't dry with a hard edge. Then we'll grab some of that violet and do the same thing again, just placing it onto the surface with one brush, then teasing out the edges with another. Your glazes are going to stay wet for quite a while when you're using them, so don't worry about having to rush this. You have more than enough time to feather the edges out. The idea here is just to keep adding different colours to the surface until you get an interesting earthy effect. It's going to give you way more of a convincing result than if you were just to dry brush over a base coat. I find it's more fun to actually do as well because you're essentially just playing about with the paint and seeing what happens. Next up we're going to take some of the pure red ochre and continue that process of placing the colour on, then using a second brush to feather out the edges of the glaze. You can see here that the chimera paints are quite intense even with these really thin glazes. I quite like the way that red ochre colour looks, so I'm going to slap a bit more on there. Just be sure to draw the edges of the glaze out after you place it onto the surface. You can also use a hairdryer to speed up the drying time. We already have quite a nice mix of colours on there. I like where it's going, but we can mess about with it a bit more to get a better effect. So to continue, I'll use some more of that violet. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then I think a bit more of the red ochre to get a really nice rich reddy brown colour. Yep, it's starting to come together now. To get even more variation, we'll use some of the wood ink and just splat it randomly over the surface. It's quite a nice sepia colour, also it dries with a bit of a glossier finish, which is quite nice because it gives us some difference in the level of shine between the various paints. And just like we did with all the other ones, I'm going to draw that out a little with a second brush. Maybe I'll add some of that round the edges as well. We've kind of been neglecting them so far, so we might as well give them some attention while we're here. So you can see that this isn't a step-based process as such. You're just farting about, adding different colours as and when you see fit. Just try and have a bit of fun playing about with the paints. I think I'll add a bit more of that green tone because we didn't really include much of that. So it would be nice to get some more of that on there. Yeah, I'm really liking how that's turned out. I don't know if it comes across very well on the video, but as you turn the base around, you can perceive all the different colours to a greater or lesser extent. So the way it looks changes depending on the angle you're looking at it. It's actually really cool. So just to finish that off, we'll pick out some of the details with a simple dry brush. First we'll mix a light desaturated colour by mixing some white into our red ochre, making it really quite bright, and then we'll mute that down with a tiny bit of black so that it sort of greys it slightly. We don't want to use a really intense paint for the highlights because it's going to look a bit artificial, so muting it down slightly with the black helps to avoid that. Alright, so we'll just load up on that using an old battered brush and then wipe most of the paint off on a paper towel like this. I'm pretty sure most people watching this will be familiar with dry brushing, but just in case you're not, the idea is to have as little paint on the brush as possible, so you want to wipe most of it off before you begin. Then we're going to gently draw the brush over the surface, using it a lot like a feather duster, and the paint is just going to build up on the top with the little bits of sand, just helping to bring out all those little details. Alright, so that's the earth basically finished now. I'll paint the border black so that we can see how it looks with that nice frame around it. Notice I leave that little gap there. That's because I'm not a turnip and I know the paint is started to dry on the other side, meaning that if I go over it with my brush, it's going to leave a mark on the surface. So instead what I do is dry it with a hairdryer and then I paint over the little gap. That way you get a smooth finish. Here you can see how natural it looks with all those different tones in there. It's not just a single colour. I think it works really well. And I like the way the quality of the colour changes as you turn the base around. That's probably something you'd need to experience in person to understand, but if you try it out yourself, you'll see what I'm talking about. So now that we've finished painting the earth, we can add in our grasses. For that we're going to use an old brush and paint on some PVA glue onto the raised sides of the earth. Then I'm going to take some static grass and drop it on top from a bit of a height. If you drop it from a bit of a distance like this, it doesn't clump up and you get a better effect. I'll do the same thing on the other side, first applying the PVA with an old brush, then sprinkling the grass on top from a bit of a distance. Give it a little tap to get off any excess. If you like, you can thin out the grass slightly by lightly brushing the surface like this. That's purely down to personal preference though. I like to be able to see a bit of the earth through the grass, but if you're not keen on that, you can just leave it alone. Once you're happy with the look, use a hairdryer to speed up the drying time of the glue. If you do this though, just make sure that you put the lid back on the grass, otherwise it's just going to fly all over the place and you'll be finding little bits of grass until the day you die. To add some more interest, we'll apply some grass tufts. I have a selection here I got from Gamer's Grass, they're pretty good. I like that they come in different shapes as well as sizes. Just check the colours next to the base and try and see which is going to look the most natural. I like these lighter coloured ones, I think they'll work quite well. So I'm just going to take one off the backing paper and see if I can find a decent spot for it. I want to find a place where it's going to look natural and not obscure the model. I can recommend holding the model near the base to try and get an idea of how it's going to look. I think if we have one near the front and another near the back on the other side, it's going to give us a nice balance. To add some variation, I also have these little white flowers. They're from Gamer's Grass as well, and I'm using white because it's not going to draw the eye down too much. So maybe I can put it here in the middle, that might be okay. Actually, I think what I'll do is swap out that second tuft for the flowers. I don't want the base getting too crowded, so if we just have those two on there, it's probably going to be plenty. Plus, we're going to have some decent variation between that tuft and the flowers. Quick check with a miniature to see if it's going to look okay. And yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Now that I'm happy with the placement, I'll glue them down with some PVA. You can use a clean brush to help press them down into the glue to make sure you get a solid bond. You don't want the edges of the tuft lifting up off the base. That can look really bad, so try and make sure that it sits nice and flush. You probably don't want to use one of your brand new Kalinskis like I'm doing here. Just because I'm a turnip doesn't mean you have to be. For a finishing touch, we can add a little bit of ground scatter onto the path. For that, I have some of this Secret Weapon leaf scatter. Now, judging by the smell of it, this is just dried tarragon, so you might want to raid your spice cabinet rather than buying this. If you drop some of it onto the base, you'll see that the leaves are way too big, but that's okay. What you can do is just roll them about between your fingertips. They're really brittle, so they're going to break down into smaller chunks quite easily. To get a random pattern, what I like to do is just pick up a pinch of the flakes and simply throw them onto the base. Then you can have a look and see if you like the formation or not. So it looks okay to me, but maybe the back is slightly bare, so we can just use a brush to pick up a bit of the scatter and drop it in place. Yeah, I think that looks better now. To glue them on, what you're going to do is use two brushes, one for the glue and one to pick up the bits. If you tap your brush against them, you're going to notice that they don't really stick to it, but if you lick the bristles, you'll be able to pick them up really easy just by touching the brush against them. So once you've lifted the piece, add a dot of your PVA glue on the surface and then place it onto the glue. You might need to use another dry brush to help get it off the wet one, but usually it just sticks quite nicely. Alright, so then you're going to do the same thing with each little piece. First lifting it with a wet brush and then gluing it in place. And there we have it. I'm pretty happy with the result. I think it looks awesome. All we need to do now is just attach the model to it. Alright guys, so hopefully you enjoyed this and got some ideas that you can use yourself. I don't often put that much effort into basing, but it is quite fun to do. If you're used to just dry brushing some sand, give something like this a go and see how you get on. You might surprise yourself. Want to see more videos like this one? Click subscribe so you don't miss out. Don't forget, smash the like button and leave a comment to let me know what you thought of the video. Thanks a lot for your support as always. Thanks again. Bye for now.